The rain hammered against my bedroom window like an unwelcome guest demanding entry, and I lay there in the dark, listening to the sound of my marriage dying one drop at a time. It was 3:17 in the morning when Laura's BMW finally pulled into our driveway, headlights sweeping across the ceiling like searchlights hunting for truth in all the wrong places. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I'm Jason Fairburn, and I used to think I knew what rock bottom looked like. Turns out, I was still falling. The front door clicked shut with that particular careful precision that screams guilty conscience. Laura's heels tapped against the hardwood floors downstairs, designer stilettos that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payment. I'd bought her those shoes for our anniversary last year, back when I still believed in things like forever and happily ever after. What a damn fool I'd been. I slipped out of bed and padded barefoot down the hallway, past my daughter's rooms where Beth and Janie slept peacefully, blissfully unaware that their world was about to implode. The kitchen light was already on when I reached the bottom of the stairs, casting everything in that harsh fluorescent glow that makes even beautiful people look like corpses. Laura stood at the granite island, still in her little black dress, fumbling with her purse. Her blonde hair was mussed in that particular way that suggested hands other than her own had been running through it. She looked up when she heard my footsteps, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker across her face. Fear, maybe, or guilt. Then her mask slipped back into place, all cool professionalism and manufactured innocence. "You're up late," she said, her voice carrying that practiced casualness she used in HR meetings when she was about to fire someone. "So are you." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Business dinner run long?" She turned away, busying herself with hanging up her coat. "You know how these client meetings go. Lots of schmoozing, lots of drinks, lots of—" Her phone buzzed against the granite countertop, the sound sharp and accusatory in the quiet kitchen. The screen lit up with a text message preview that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow, beautiful. Tonight was incredible." Scotty Laura lunged for the phone, but I was faster. Construction work keeps a man quick on his feet, and 20 years of swinging hammers had given me reflexes she couldn't match. I snatched the device before her manicured fingers could reach it, scrolling through messages that painted a picture uglier than anything I'd ever imagined. "Miss you already. Your husband doesn't deserve you. Can't wait until you're finally free. Jason, give me that phone right now." Her voice had gone arctic, all pretense of innocence abandoned. "You have no right to—" "No right?" I laughed, but there wasn't any humor in it. "I'm your husband, Laura. Remember? Till end do us part and all that romantic bullshit?" She straightened her spine, lifting her chin in that defiant way that used to make me fall in love with her all over again. Now it just made me want to put my fist through the wall. "Don't be dramatic. It's not what you think." "Really? Because what I think is that my wife has been screwing around with some guy named Scotty, and judging by these messages, it's been going on for a while." I held up the phone, scrolling through weeks of increasingly intimate exchanges. "So, please, enlighten me. What exactly should I be thinking?" Laura's composure cracked just enough for me to see the calculation behind her eyes. She was weighing her options, trying to figure out which lie would work best. It was like watching a poker player decide whether to bluff or fold, except the stakes were our entire life together. "His name is Scott Williams," she said finally. "He's a real estate developer. We've been working together on some projects." "Working together?" I nodded slowly. "Is that what you call it when he tells you he wants to kiss every inch of your body?" Her cheeks flushed red, but whether from embarrassment or anger, I couldn't tell. "You're taking things out of context." Context. The word tasted bitter on my tongue. Here's some context for you, sweetheart. I've been busting my ass for 15 years building a construction company so you could have everything you wanted. Nice house, nice car, nice life. And while I was working 60-hour weeks to pay for your designer clothes and spa treatments, you were playing house with some real estate pretty boy. Don't you dare make this about money, she snapped. This isn't about what you've given me or what you think I owe you. This is about us, Jason, about how we've grown apart, about how we want different things. What we want. I stepped closer, close enough to smell another man's cologne lingering on her skin. When did this become about what we want? When did you decide our marriage was a democracy where you got to vote yourself a new husband? She backed away from me, her hip bumping against the kitchen island. For the first time since I'd known her, Laura looked genuinely afraid. Good. She should be afraid. Not of me. I'd never laid a hand on her in anger, and I wasn't about to start now, but of the consequences of her choices. I want a divorce, she said quietly. The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a house fire, acrid and choking. I'd been expecting them, but hearing them out loud still felt like taking a sledgehammer to the chest. A divorce. I nodded again, that same slow, deliberate motion. Just like that. 15 years of marriage, 2 kids, a life we built together, and you want to throw it all away for some real estate Romeo. It's not just about Scott, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. We've been having problems for years. You know we have. Problems. I laughed again, that same bitter sound. You mean like how I work too much? How I don't appreciate the finer things in life? How I'm not sophisticated enough for your country club friends? This isn't the time for… No, I think this is exactly the time. I leaned against the counter, studying her face in the harsh kitchen light. See, here's the thing about problems, Laura. Most people try to solve them. They go to counseling, they have conversations, they work things out. They don't just jump into bed with the first smooth-talking asshole who tells them what they want to hear. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Scotty, probably wondering why she wasn't responding to his romantic drivel. Laura reached for it instinctively, then stopped herself when she saw the look on my face. You have 48 hours, she said suddenly. For what? To find somewhere else to live. Her voice had gone cold again, all business. Scott owns this house now. We closed on it yesterday. The words hit me like a physical blow. What are you talking about? I had you sign the papers 3 weeks ago. You remember those documents I said were for the business loan? She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Turns out they were quit-claim deeds. The house belongs to Scott now, and he wants you out. I stared at her, trying to process what she'd just told me. You forged my signature on a property transfer? I didn't forge anything. You signed them yourself. She shrugged, as casual as if she were discussing the weather. Not my fault you didn't read what you were signing. The rage that had been building in my chest suddenly crystallized into something cold and sharp. This wasn't just adultery anymore. This was theft. This was fraud. This was my wife and her boyfriend conspiring to steal my home, my children's home, right out from under us. 48 hours, she repeated. After that, it's trespassing. I looked at her for a long moment, really looked at her. The woman I'd married, the mother of my children, the person I'd trusted with my life and my heart. She was gone, replaced by this cold, calculating stranger who could smile while she twisted the knife. You know what, Laura? I said finally. You're absolutely right. I should go. Something flickered across her face, surprise maybe, that I was giving in so easily. She'd been expecting a fight, prepared for tears and pleading and desperate bargaining. Instead, I just smiled. I hope you and Scott will be very happy together, I continued. I really do. And I hope you enjoy living in this beautiful house that he bought for you. Jason, just one thing, though. I pushed myself away from the counter, heading for the stairs. You might want to ask your new boyfriend if he bothered to check who actually owns the land this house is sitting on. I was halfway up the stairs when I heard her call my name, but I didn't stop. Let her wonder, let her worry. Let her spend the next 48 hours trying to figure out what I meant. Because Laura had made one crucial mistake in her little scheme. She'd assumed I was stupid. She'd assumed that 15 years of marriage had made me soft, that I'd roll over and play dead while she and her real estate Romeo carved up my life between them. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. The construction yard looked like a graveyard for broken dreams in the pre-dawn darkness, all twisted metal and abandoned machinery casting long shadows under the security lights. I'd been living out of my office for 3 days now, sleeping on the couch and showering in the employee bathroom like some kind of industrial vagrant. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and right now, that mattered more than comfort. My phone buzzed with another text from Laura's lawyer, some slick downtown firm that specialized in separating men from their assets with surgical precision. They wanted me to sign papers acknowledging the property transfer, wanted me to make their theft official with my signature. I deleted the message without reading it all the way through. Boss, you look like hammered shit, Manny Gutierrez announced as he walked through the office door, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing his usual grin. Manny had been my right-hand man for 8 years, ever since I'd caught him trying to steal copper wire from a job site and offered him a job instead of a trip to county lockup. Best decision I'd ever made. Thanks for the pep talk, I said, accepting the coffee gratefully. You always know just what to say to make a man feel better about himself. Hey, I calls 'em like I sees 'em. He settled into the chair across from my desk, studying my face with those sharp, dark eyes that missed nothing. So what's the plan, boss? We gonna let your wife and her fancy boy toy railroad you, or are we gonna fight back? I'd filled Manny in on the whole sordid story the day before, partly because I needed someone to talk to and partly because I was going to need his help with what came next. Manny had a talent for creative problem-solving that bordered on artistic, and he'd never met a rule he couldn't find a way around. We're going to fight back, I said, but we're going to be smart about it. No more Mr. Nice Guy, no more playing by their rules. Now you're talking my language. Manny rubbed his hands together like a kid on Christmas morning. What do you need me to do? I pulled out a manila folder I'd been putting together, spreading the contents across my desk. Property records, legal documents, photographs, bank statements, the paper trail of my marriage's destruction laid out in black and white. First, I need you to set up surveillance on the house, I said. Nothing illegal, nothing that could get us in trouble. Just basic stuff. Dash cam footage, audio recordings of any conversations that happen in public spaces. I want to know who's coming and going, when they're there, what they're doing. Easy enough. What else? I need you to dig into Scott Williams. Find out everything you can about him, his business, his finances, his personal life. Guy like that doesn't get to where he is without making enemies or cutting corners. I want to know where the bodies are buried. Manny made notes on a legal pad, nodding as I talked. What about the property transfer? You gonna fight that in court? Already talked to a lawyer about it. Turns out Laura was telling the truth. I did sign those papers. The fact that she lied about what they were doesn't matter legally, since the documents themselves are legitimate. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of exhaustion settling into my bones. But here's the thing, Manny. Scott Williams might own the house now, but he doesn't own the land it's sitting on. Manny's eyebrows shot up. Come again? When I bought that property 12 years ago, I structured it as a land lease to save money on taxes. The house sits on a 99-year lease that I hold personally, separate from any other assets. Laura didn't know about it because it was set up before we got married, and Scott's fancy lawyers didn't catch it because they were in such a hurry to close the deal. So, what does that mean? I smiled for the first time in days. It means Scott Williams owns a house that he can't legally occupy without my permission, and as of yesterday, I revoked that permission. Manny let out a low whistle. Boss, that's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. So, what happens now? Now we wait and see how long it takes them to figure out what they've stepped in. I finished my coffee and stood up, feeling more energetic than I had since this whole nightmare started. In the meantime, we make their lives as complicated as possible. I like the sound of that. What did you have in mind? I walked over to the window, looking out at the yard where my crews were already starting their day. Good men, hard workers, guys who understood loyalty and respect. They'd follow me into hell if I asked them to, and right now, that kind of devotion was exactly what I needed. Scott Williams drives a BMW 7 Series, I said. Silver license plate reads Sold 1. Parks it in the driveway of my house every night like he's marking his territory. And I think it's time we showed him what we think of his territorial instincts. Manny's grin widened. Now you're talking. What do you want to do to it? Nothing permanent, nothing that could be traced back to us, but maybe his morning commute could be a little more interesting tomorrow. We spent the next hour planning our first strike, mapping out timing and logistics with the precision of a military operation. It felt good to be taking action, to be fighting back instead of just absorbing punishment. Laura and Scott had made the mistake of thinking I was beaten, that I'd slink away with my tail between my legs and let them enjoy their stolen victory in peace. They were about to learn that Jason Fairburn didn't go down without a fight. That evening, I drove past the house, my house, and felt my jaw clench at the sight of Scott's BMW parked in the driveway like it belonged there. The lights were on in the kitchen, and I could see 2 figures moving around inside, playing house with my life. I parked 3 blocks away and walked back, staying in the shadows and keeping to the tree line. The neighborhood was quiet, most people already settled in for the night with their families and their normal, uncomplicated lives. Mrs. Larrabee's house next door was dark except for the flickering glow of her television, and I could see her silhouette in the living room window, probably watching her evening soap operas and gossiping with her sister on the phone. Scott's car was unlocked. Arrogant bastard probably figured he was safe in suburbia, surrounded by law-abiding citizens who respected other people's property. I popped the hood as quietly as possible, locating the spark plug wires in the darkness by feel. 30 seconds later, I disconnected them and tucked them neatly behind the battery, where they wouldn't be immediately visible. Then I moved to the air conditioning intake, pulling out the bag of shrimp I'd picked up from the grocery store on my way over. Day-old shrimp, starting to turn but not quite rotten yet. Perfect for what I had in mind. I stuffed the shrimp deep into the AC system, making sure they were wedged in places where they wouldn't be easily found or removed. Come tomorrow morning, when Scott fired up his luxury sedan for his commute to the office, he was going to get a very unpleasant surprise. The whole operation took less than 5 minutes. I was back in my truck and driving away before anyone in the neighborhood even knew I'd been there. As I headed back to the construction yard, I found myself humming an old country song about revenge being a dish best served cold. Scott Williams was about to get his first taste of what happened when you messed with the wrong man's family. The next morning, Manny was waiting for me with coffee and a shit-eating grin that told me our little surprise had been a success. "Boss, you should have seen it," he said, pulling out his phone to show me the video he'd captured from across the street. Dude came out all dressed up in his fancy suit, fired up the car, and about 30 seconds later he was stumbling out looking like he was gonna puke his guts up. I watched the footage, enjoying every second of Scott's confusion and disgust as the smell of rotting seafood filled his precious BMW. He'd popped the hood, poked around under there for a few minutes, then given up and called what I assumed was a tow truck. "Think he figured out what happened?" I asked. "Nah. Guy like that probably thinks cars run on fairy dust and good intentions. He'll take it to the dealer, they'll find the shrimp eventually, but by then the smell will be baked into the upholstery. That car's gonna stink for months." "Good." I felt a savage satisfaction watching Scott pace around his disabled vehicle, cell phone pressed to his ear as he tried to explain his situation to someone who probably thought he was crazy. Let's see how he likes playing in the big leagues. But our victory was short-lived. An hour later, my phone rang with a call from Laura's lawyer, and the conversation that followed made it clear that our little prank had been noticed and documented. "Mr. Fairburn," the lawyer said in that oily voice that all divorce attorneys seem to cultivate, "my client has reason to believe you were on the property last night engaging in acts of vandalism and harassment." "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, keeping my voice level and professional. "Mr. Williams's vehicle was sabotaged sometime between midnight and 6 a.m. Given your recent threats and erratic behavior, we have to assume you were responsible." "That's a hell of an assumption. Maybe your client should park his car somewhere more secure if he's worried about vandalism." There was a pause, and I could practically hear the lawyer grinding his teeth. "Mr. Fairburn, let me be very clear about something. Any further harassment of my clients will result in a restraining order and criminal charges. Do I make myself understood?" "Crystal clear," I said, and hung up. Manny looked at me expectantly. "So what now?" I thought about it for a moment, weighing our options. They were on to us now, which meant we'd have to be more careful going forward. But they'd also shown their hand. They were worried, defensive, reacting instead of acting. That gave us an advantage we could exploit. "Now we get creative," I said. "They want to play legal games? Fine. Let's see how they handle a little civil disobedience." The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a process server who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. I read it twice, savoring the legal language that tried to make theft sound respectable, then crumpled it up and tossed it in the trash. 48 hours to vacate the premises, I told Manny as he walked into the office. Apparently I'm trespassing on my own property now. Those bastards don't waste any time, do they? Manny poured himself coffee from the pot that had become our lifeline over the past week. "So what's the play, boss?" I'd spent the weekend researching property law, diving deep into the legal rabbit hole that governed land leases and property rights. What I'd found had given me hope, and a plan that would turn Scott Williams' victory into his worst nightmare. "Remember how I told you Scott owns the house but not the land?" I pulled out a thick folder of documents I'd retrieved from my lawyer's office. Well, it turns out that little detail is more important than even I realized. I spread the papers across my desk, pointing to the relevant sections as I explained. The land lease includes control over all utilities access, road maintenance, and structural modifications. Scott can own the house all he wants, but he can't run electricity or water to it without my permission. He can't repair the driveway, can't install new cable lines, can't even cut down a tree without getting approval from the leaseholder. Manny's eyes lit up. "Which is you? Which is me? And as of this morning, I'm revoking all utility access permissions and canceling the maintenance agreements that keep his pretty new house functional. Is that legal?" "Completely legal. The lease agreement is ironclad, and Scott's lawyers never bothered to read the fine print before they closed the deal." I felt that familiar surge of satisfaction as the pieces of my plan clicked into place. By tomorrow morning, Scott Williams is going to own the most expensive pile of sticks in the county. We spent the rest of the morning making phone calls to utility companies and service providers, officially terminating the agreements that kept the house livable. The electric company would disconnect power by end of business today. Water and sewer would be shut off tomorrow morning. Cable and internet were already gone. "What about Laura and the girls?" Manny asked as we finished the last call. That was the part that hurt the most. Beth and Janie were innocent victims in all this, caught in the crossfire of their parents' war. But Laura had made her choice when she decided to steal my home and hand it over to her boyfriend. If she wanted to play hardball, I'd show her what hardball really looked like. "Laura made her bed," I said. "She can explain to the girls why Mommy's new boyfriend bought them a house without electricity or running water." The first sign that our plan was working came that evening, when my phone started ringing with increasingly frantic calls from Laura. I let them all go to voicemail, listening to her messages with grim satisfaction. Jason, what did you do? The power's out and the electric company says you canceled the service. This is insane. You can't just leave your daughters without electricity. Call me back right now. Scott's lawyer says you're violating some kind of court order, but I know you're just being petty and vindictive. This has gone far enough. The girls are scared, Jason. They don't understand what's happening. Please just call me back so we can work this out like adults. But I wasn't feeling particularly adult anymore. I was feeling mean and angry and ready to burn down everything that reminded me of the life Laura had stolen from me. She wanted to play games with lawyers and property transfers. Fine. I'd show her a game she'd never forget. The next morning brought a new development that I hadn't expected. Mrs. Larrabee called me at 7 a.m., her voice quivering with excitement and gossip. Jason, dear, I thought you should know. There's quite a commotion over at your house. That Williams man is out in the yard screaming at someone on his phone, and Laura's loading suitcases into her car. Is that so? I tried to keep the satisfaction out of my voice. Sounds like they're having some kind of domestic dispute. Oh, it's more than that. The water company was here an hour ago, and now there's a big yellow truck from the electric company in the driveway. That Williams man tried to argue with them, but they just packed up their tools and left. I thanked Mrs. Larrabee and hung up, feeling better than I had in weeks. Scott and Laura were learning the hard way that owning a house and being able to live in it were two very different things. But my celebration was premature. 20 minutes later, Scott Williams himself showed up at my construction yard, his face red with anger and his expensive suit wrinkled like he'd slept in it. You bastard, he said, storming into my office without knocking. What the hell do you think you're doing? I looked up from my paperwork, taking my time to study the man who'd been screwing my wife. Scott Williams was everything I'd expected. Tall, handsome in that generic Ken doll way that women seem to find irresistible, with perfect teeth and perfectly styled hair that probably cost more to maintain than most people's car payments. I'm sorry, do we know each other? I asked mildly. Cut the shit, Fairburn. You know exactly who I am and why I'm here. Actually, I don't. You're trespassing on private property, and I'd appreciate it if you'd leave. Scott stepped closer to my desk, trying to use his height to intimidate me. It might have worked if I hadn't spent the last 20 years dealing with angry contractors and pissed-off clients who thought volume and aggression could substitute for being right. You turned off the utilities to my house, he said. Your house? I leaned back in my chair, enjoying his frustration. That's interesting. See, according to my records, the house at 1247 Maple Street sits on land that I own under a 99-year lease agreement. And as the leaseholder, I have the right to control utility access to that property. That's impossible. My lawyers would have caught something like that. Your lawyers are idiots. I opened the folder on my desk, pulling out copies of the lease documents. Here's the original agreement filed with the county recorder's office 12 years ago. Here's the renewal I signed 5 years ago. And here's the utility access revocation I filed yesterday morning. Scott grabbed the papers, scanning them with growing panic. I watched his face go from red to white as the implications sank in. This can't be legal, he said finally. Oh, it's completely legal. Your girlfriend can confirm that. She works in HR, so she should understand contracts and legal documents. Oh, wait, she's the one who tricked me into signing over the house in the first place. Maybe contract law isn't her strong suit after all. You bastard. Scott's hands were shaking now, whether from anger or fear, I couldn't tell. You can't do this. I have rights. You have the right to own a house that sits on land you can't legally occupy without my permission. I stood up, matching his aggressive posture. You want to play games with my family? You want to steal my home and sleep in my bed? Fine. But you're going to do it without electricity, without running water, and without any of the other conveniences that make modern life bearable. I'll sue you into the ground. Go ahead. I've got lawyers too, and mine actually know how to read a property deed. I walked around the desk, getting close enough to smell his expensive cologne. But here's a better idea. Why don't you and Laura find somewhere else to play house? Somewhere that doesn't involve my property or my family? Scott stared at me for a long moment, probably trying to decide whether to throw a punch or storm out dramatically. In the end, self-preservation won out over machismo. "This isn't over," he said, backing toward the door. "No, it's not," I agreed. "It's just getting started." He left without another word, and I watched through the window as he peeled out of the parking lot in his rental car. Apparently, the BMW was still in the shop getting de-shrimped. I was still watching when Manny walked in, carrying lunch and wearing his trademark grin. "Was that the famous Scott Williams?" he asked, in the flesh, and he looked about as happy as a man can be when he realizes he just bought himself a very expensive pile of problems. "Think he'll back down?" I thought about the desperation I'd seen in Scott's eyes, the way his hands had shaken when he realized how thoroughly he'd been outmaneuvered. Men like him were used to winning, used to having their money and connections smooth over any obstacles in their path. They didn't handle adversity well. "No," I said. "He'll fight back. But he's going to fight stupid, and that's going to be his downfall." I was right. That afternoon, Scott's lawyers filed an emergency injunction trying to force me to restore utility service to the house. They argued that I was acting in bad faith, that I was using the lease agreement to harass their client and interfere with his property rights. The judge threw it out in less than 20 minutes. Mr. Williams entered into a property transaction without performing due diligence, the ruling read. The existence of the land lease is a matter of public record, and his failure to discover it does not constitute grounds for emergency relief. But Scott wasn't done. That evening, he showed up at the house with a portable generator and a crew of electricians, apparently planning to jury-rig some kind of temporary power solution. I got the call from Mrs. Larrabee just as they were unloading their equipment. "Jason, dear, that Williams man is back with a whole bunch of workers. They've got some kind of big machine on a trailer, and they're running extension cords everywhere." "Thanks for letting me know, Mrs. Larrabee. I'll be right over." I grabbed Manny and we drove to the house, arriving just as Scott's crew was firing up the generator. The noise was incredible, a diesel-powered monster that sounded like a jet engine and probably violated every noise ordinance in the city. "Excuse me?" I called out to the lead electrician. "Who authorized this work?" "Mr. Williams hired us to install temporary power," the man replied, having to shout over the generator noise. "Mr. Williams doesn't have authority to modify the electrical systems on this property without permission from the leaseholder." I pulled out my phone, dialing the non-emergency police number. "I'm calling the cops to report an illegal electrical installation." Scott appeared from around the side of the house, his face flushed with anger and exertion. "You can't stop me from making my own property habitable. Watch me." I kept the phone to my ear as the dispatcher answered. "Yes, I'd like to report an illegal electrical installation in progress at 1247 Maple Street. The work is being done without proper permits and against the wishes of the property leaseholder." The police arrived 20 minutes later, followed closely by a city inspector who took one look at the jury-rigged power setup and ordered it disconnected immediately. Scott argued and threatened and probably offered bribes, but in the end, his expensive generator got loaded back onto the trailer and his crew packed up their tools. "This is harassment," Scott said as the last of his workers drove away. "This is property law," I replied. "Maybe you should have learned the difference before you decided to steal my house." That night, I slept better than I had since this whole nightmare began. Scott Williams was learning that money and connections couldn't solve every problem, and Laura was learning that actions had consequences. They'd started this war, but I was going to finish it, and I was just getting warmed up. The 4th of July block party had been a neighborhood tradition for as long as I could remember. Every year, the residents of Maple Street would close off the road, set up grills and picnic tables, and spend the day celebrating America with hot dogs, beer, and enough fireworks to make the local fire department nervous. Laura and I had hosted it 3 times over the years, back when we were still the picture-perfect suburban couple with the picture-perfect marriage. This year, I wasn't invited. "They can't legally exclude you from a public street," Diana Mays told me as we sat in her kitchen, watching the setup through her window. Diana lived 2 blocks over, and we'd been spending more time together since my world imploded. She was a single mom, a nurse at the local hospital, and one of the few people who didn't treat me like a pariah after the divorce rumors started spreading. "Technically, you're right," I said, sipping the coffee she'd made. "But showing up uninvited to a neighborhood party where my estranged wife and her boyfriend are playing host probably isn't the smartest move I could make." "Since when do you care about smart moves?" Diana smiled, but there was concern in her eyes. "The Jason Fairburn I know doesn't back down from a fight, especially when he's in the right." She had a point. For the past 2 weeks, I'd been waging a guerrilla campaign against Scott and Laura, using every legal tool at my disposal to make their lives miserable. The house still sat, dark and powerless, uninhabitable despite Scott's ownership papers. Laura had moved in with Scott at his downtown condo, leaving my daughters confused and angry about why they couldn't live in their own home anymore. "Mrs. Larrabee called me this morning," I said. "Apparently Laura's planning to announce her engagement at the party today. She wants to make it official in front of all the neighbors, really rub it in everyone's faces." "Are you going to let her get away with that?" I looked out the window at the growing crowd on Maple Street. Families setting up lawn chairs, kids running around with sparklers, neighbors catching up on gossip and enjoying the summer weather. My neighbors, my street, my community, at least until Scott Williams decided to buy his way into it. "No," I said finally. "I don't think I am." An hour later, Manny and I were walking down Maple Street like we owned the place, which technically I still did, at least the part under the houses. The party was in full swing, maybe 50 people scattered across the blocked-off street, and the smell of grilling burgers filled the air. The conversation died as people noticed us approaching. I could feel their eyes following our progress, whispers spreading through the crowd like ripples on a pond. Some of the neighbors looked sympathetic. They'd known me for years, watched me build my business and raise my daughters. Others looked uncomfortable, caught between loyalty to an old friend and curiosity about the neighborhood drama that had been unfolding in front of their houses. "Jason!" Mrs. Larrabee appeared at my elbow, her face bright with excitement. "I didn't expect to see you here, dear. How are you holding up?" "I'm doing fine, Mrs. Larrabee. Just thought I'd stop by and enjoy the festivities." Of course. This is still your neighborhood, after all." She leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "That Williams man has been holding court by the beer table, telling everyone how he's going to renovate the house and improve property values for the whole street. Acting like he's some kind of neighborhood savior." I followed her gaze and spotted Scott near the center of the party, surrounded by a small crowd of neighbors and gesticulating dramatically as he told some story. He was dressed in expensive casual wear, designer jeans and a polo shirt that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. Laura stood beside him, laughing at his jokes and playing the role of devoted girlfriend for their audience. "Where are Beth and Janie?" I asked, scanning the crowd for my daughters. "Laura dropped them off at her mother's house this morning," Mrs. Larrabee said. "Said she didn't want them around for the announcement." That stung more than I wanted to admit. Laura was planning to announce her engagement to another man, and she didn't even want our children present for it. She was erasing us from her new life one piece at a time, and apparently, our daughters were just inconvenient reminders of the past she was trying to forget. "Come on," I said to Manny. "Let's go get a beer." We made our way through the crowd, nodding to neighbors and accepting the awkward condolences that people offered when they didn't know what else to say. The beer table was positioned right next to the makeshift stage where someone had set up a microphone and speakers for announcements and toasts. Scott noticed us approaching, and his face went through a series of interesting expressions, surprise, anger, and finally a kind of calculating smugness that told me he saw our arrival as an opportunity rather than a threat. "Well, well," he said loudly enough for the surrounding crowd to hear. "Look who decided to crash the party." "It's a public street," I replied, accepting a beer from one of the volunteers manning the table. Last I checked, I still had the right to walk on public property. For now. Scott's smile was all teeth and no warmth. But I wouldn't get too comfortable if I were you. Property values in this neighborhood are about to go up significantly, and I'm not sure you're going to be able to afford the new tax assessments. Is that a threat? It's a promise. I'm planning some major improvements to the house, additions, landscaping, maybe a swimming pool. Really bring the property up to modern standards. He gestured toward the dark house behind us. Of course, I'll need to resolve some minor legal issues first, but my lawyers assure me that won't be a problem. I took a sip of my beer, studying Scott's face. He was performing for the crowd, trying to project confidence and control, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. 2 weeks of living in legal limbo had taken their toll, and despite his brave words, he was starting to realize that his problems weren't as easily solved as he'd initially thought. "Minor legal issues," I repeated. "Is that what you're calling it?" "What would you call it?" "I'd call it a man who bought a house without doing his homework, and now he's stuck with a pile of expensive lumber that he can't legally live in." The crowd around us was growing, neighbors drawn by the obvious tension between Scott and me. I could see Laura pushing through the group, her face tight with anxiety, as she realized that her perfect party was about to turn into a public confrontation. "Jason, what are you doing here?" she demanded. "Enjoying the 4th of July with my neighbors," I said. "Same as everyone else." "You weren't invited. It's a public street, Laura. I don't need an invitation to walk on my own neighborhood roads." Scott stepped closer, using his height advantage to try to intimidate me. "I think you should leave. You're making people uncomfortable." "Am I?" I looked around at the faces surrounding us. Some looked uncomfortable, but most looked fascinated. Neighborhood drama was better than cable television, and everyone wanted to see how this confrontation would play out. "I don't know, Scott. People seem pretty interested in what we're talking about." "They're interested in hearing about my renovation plans," Scott said. "About how I'm going to turn that old house into a showcase property that benefits the entire neighborhood." "Your renovation plans?" I nodded thoughtfully. "That's interesting. Tell me, have you figured out how you're going to renovate a house that you can't legally occupy or modify without permission from the leaseholder?" Scott's confident smile faltered slightly. "That's a temporary situation. My lawyers—" "Your lawyers are idiots," I interrupted. "They let you buy a house that sits on land you don't control, and now you're stuck with a worthless asset that you can't use, can't improve, and can't sell without taking a massive loss." "That's not true, isn't it?" I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the photos I'd taken that morning. "Because, according to the county assessor's office, the property taxes on 1247 Maple Street just went up by 40%. Seems like owning an uninhabitable house in a desirable neighborhood is an expensive hobby." The crowd murmured at that revelation. Property taxes were a sensitive subject in our neighborhood, and the idea that Scott's legal problems might affect everyone's assessments was clearly making people nervous. Laura grabbed Scott's arm, trying to pull him away from the confrontation. "Scott, don't. Let's just make the announcement and ignore him." But Scott was too angry to back down now. His carefully constructed image was crumbling in front of an audience, and his pride wouldn't let him walk away without trying to salvage some dignity. "You want to know what's really going on here?" he said, his voice rising. "This is about a bitter, pathetic man who can't accept that his wife found someone better. Someone who can actually provide for her. Someone who doesn't spend his days playing in the dirt with construction workers." The insult hung in the air like smoke from a backyard grill, acrid and choking. I felt the familiar anger building in my chest, but this time I didn't try to control it. This time, I let it fuel me. Someone better, I repeated. You mean someone who steals other men's houses through fraud and deception? Someone who seduces married women and then hides behind lawyers when the consequences catch up with him? I didn't steal anything. I bought that house fair and square. You bought a house that my wife tricked me into signing over without reading the documents. That's called fraud, Scott. And when the dust settles and all the lawyers are done billing their hours, you're going to be left with nothing but a pile of expensive legal bills and a reputation as the man who was too stupid to read a property deed. Scott's face went red with rage. You son of a... He lunged at me, throwing a wild haymaker that would have connected if I hadn't been expecting it. Construction work keeps a man quick on his feet, and 20 years of dealing with angry subcontractors had taught me how to handle myself in a fight. I ducked under his punch and grabbed him around the waist, using his momentum to drive him backward across the street. He stumbled and fell, landing hard on the asphalt with me on top of him. The crowd scattered, parents grabbing their children and neighbors shouting for someone to call the police. Get off me! Scott thrashed beneath me, trying to throw punches from his back. Get off me, you psycho! I pinned his arms to the ground, my face inches from his. Listen to me very carefully, you piece of shit. That's my house you're trying to steal, and those are my daughters you're disrupting. You want to play games with lawyers and property transfers? Fine. But when you mess with my family, you mess with me, and I promise you, that's a fight you can't win. Jason, stop! Laura's voice cut through the chaos, high and panicked. Let him go! I looked up to see her standing over us, her face pale with shock and fear. Behind her, I could see neighbors pulling out cell phones, recording the confrontation for posterity and social media. In the distance, I could hear sirens approaching. Someone had called the cops. I released Scott and stood up, brushing dirt off my clothes. He scrambled to his feet, his expensive polo shirt torn and dirty, his perfect hair disheveled. For a moment, he looked like he was going to take another swing at me, but the approaching sirens seemed to remind him that discretion was the better part of valor. This isn't over, he said, backing away from me. No, I agreed. It's not. But the next time you want to dance, make sure you're ready for the music. The police arrived as the crowd was dispersing, 2 patrol cars with lights flashing and officers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else than breaking up a middle-aged domestic dispute. They separated Scott and me, taking statements and trying to figure out who was at fault. In the end, nobody got arrested. It was a public street, both of us had a right to be there, and the fight had been brief enough that no serious damage was done. The officers gave us both warnings about disturbing the peace and suggested we find ways to resolve our differences that didn't involve public brawling. You need to stay away from my clients, Laura's lawyer told me as the police were finishing their paperwork. He'd arrived 20 minutes after the fight ended, probably summoned by Laura's frantic phone call. This kind of harassment has to stop. Harassment? I laughed. I came to a public party on a public street in my own neighborhood. If your clients can't handle seeing me in public, maybe they should find somewhere else to live. We're getting a restraining order. Good luck with that. I haven't threatened anyone, I haven't damaged any property, and I haven't done anything illegal. Your client threw the first punch, and there are 50 witnesses who saw it happen. The lawyer looked frustrated, probably because he knew I was right. Scott had initiated the physical confrontation, and the video evidence that was undoubtedly already circulating on social media would back up my version of events. As the crowd finally dispersed and the street started to return to normal, I found myself standing alone with Manny in front of my old house. The windows were still dark, the yard still showing signs of neglect from 2 weeks without proper maintenance. Think we made our point? Manny asked. I think we made several points, I said. Scott Williams isn't as tough as he pretends to be. Laura's starting to realize that her fairy tale romance has some serious complications, and the whole neighborhood now knows that I'm not going to roll over and play dead. So what's next? I looked at the house one more time, thinking about all the memories contained within those walls. Beth's first steps in the living room, Janie's birthday parties in the backyard, quiet evenings with Laura before everything went to hell. Scott Williams might own the structure now, but he'd never own the history that lived inside it. Now we turn up the heat, I said. They wanted a war, and they're going to get one. But it's going to be fought on my terms, with my rules. As we walked back to the truck, I could see Mrs. Larrabee watching from her front window, probably already composing the phone calls she'd make to spread the news of today's excitement throughout the neighborhood gossip network. By tomorrow morning, everyone in a 5-mile radius would know about the fight at the 4th of July party, and Scott Williams' reputation as a sophisticated real estate developer would be permanently tarnished. It was a good start, but it was just the beginning. Laura and Scott had made the mistake of thinking they could humiliate me in public, could steal my home and parade their relationship in front of my neighbors without consequences. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The restraining order arrived on a Wednesday morning, delivered with the same ceremonial pomp that seemed to accompany all legal documents designed to make a man feel small. I read it twice over my morning coffee, admiring the creative legal language that tried to make my presence at a public block party sound like stalking. Petitioner requests that respondent be enjoined from coming within 500 feet of petitioner's residence, place of business, or person, I read aloud to Manny, who was sorting through blueprints at the other end of my desk. Petitioner alleges respondent has engaged in harassment, intimidation, and threatening behavior. Threatening behavior, Manny snorted. You mean like buying a house you can't legally live in, and then crying about it when someone points out how stupid you are? Apparently. But here's the interesting part. They're asking for protection from harassment at Scott's residence, which he lists as 1247 Maple Street. I set the papers down, feeling that familiar surge of satisfaction. Problem is, Scott doesn't legally reside at 1247 Maple Street. He can't, because I revoked his permission to occupy the land the house sits on. So what does that mean? It means Scott Williams just committed perjury in a court filing. He swore under oath that he lives at an address where he has no legal right to reside. I reached for my phone, dialing my lawyer's number. And that, my friend, is going to be his downfall. The legal wheels turned slowly, but they turned with grinding inevitability. Within a week, Scott's perjury had been exposed, the restraining order had been dismissed, and his lawyers were scrambling to explain how their client had managed to lie to a judge about his place of residence. But the real damage was happening behind the scenes, in the quiet conversations between bankers and insurance agents and city officials who were starting to ask uncomfortable questions about Scott Williams's business practices. Turns out your boy Scott has been playing fast and loose with property law for years, my lawyer told me during our Thursday morning meeting. The perjury charge opened up his whole operation to scrutiny, and the State Real Estate Commission is very interested in some of the deals he's been making. What kind of deals? The kind where he buys properties through shell companies, flips them to his own LLC at inflated prices, then uses the artificial equity to secure loans that he has no intention of repaying. The lawyer leaned back in his chair, looking pleased with himself. It's a sophisticated Ponzi scheme, and your little property dispute just brought the whole thing crashing down. I felt a cold satisfaction settling in my chest. Scott Williams wasn't just a homewrecker and a thief. He was a criminal, and now the authorities were finally paying attention. What about Laura? What about her? Is she involved in any of this? The lawyer consulted his notes. Hard to say. She signed some documents as a witness, and she's listed as a beneficiary on a few of the shell company accounts. Could be she was an innocent dupe. Could be she was a willing participant. Either way, when Scott goes down, she's going to get dragged down with him. That should have made me happy. Laura had betrayed me, stolen from me, humiliated me in front of our neighbors and friends. She deserved whatever consequences came from her choices. But all I could think about were Beth and Janie, and how they were going to feel when their mother got arrested alongside her boyfriend. How long before the hammer falls? Soon. The FBI is putting together a task force and they're moving fast. Scott's been using federally insured banks to finance his schemes, which makes it a federal case. I'd guess they'll start making arrests within the month. I left the lawyer's office feeling strangely hollow. I'd wanted revenge, and I was about to get it in spades. Scott Williams was going to prison, Laura was going to face criminal charges, and I was going to get my house back along with everything else they'd tried to steal from me. So why didn't it feel like victory? The answer came to me that evening as I sat in my empty office, staring at the phone and trying to decide whether to call my daughters. Beth and Janie were staying with Laura's mother, caught in the middle of a war they didn't understand and couldn't escape. They'd already lost their home, their sense of security, their belief that their parents could protect them from the ugly realities of the adult world. When the FBI came for their mother, they'd lose even more. I was still wrestling with my conscience when Manny walked in, carrying Chinese takeout and wearing an expression I'd never seen before, something that might have been respect or maybe just recognition. "Heard from Mrs. Larrabee today," he said, setting the food on my desk. "Seems like Scott and Laura had a big fight last night. Neighbors could hear them screaming at each other from 3 houses away." "About what?" "About you, mostly. About how you've been playing them from the beginning. How you knew exactly what would happen when you revoked the land lease." Manny opened his container of lo mein, studying my face. "She called you some names I won't repeat in polite company." "I'll bet she did." "Mrs. Larrabee also said Laura packed up her car and drove away around midnight. Haven't seen her since." That got my attention. "Where did she go?" "Nobody knows. Scott's been calling around the neighborhood asking if anyone's seen her. Sounds like she cleaned out their joint bank account before she left." I thought about that, trying to imagine Laura's state of mind. She was smart enough to see the walls closing in, smart enough to realize that Scott's legal problems were about to become her legal problems. Running made sense from a practical standpoint, but it also meant abandoning Beth and Janie, leaving them to deal with the aftermath of their parents' war. "Boss," Manny said quietly, "you know this isn't going to end well for anyone, right? Not for Scott, not for Laura, not for your kids, maybe not even for you." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you won. You beat them. You got your revenge. You proved that nobody messes with Jason Fairburn and gets away with it. But what did you actually win?" I looked around my office, taking inventory of my victory. A failing marriage, 2 confused and frightened daughters, a house I couldn't afford to maintain on my own, and a reputation in the neighborhood as the man who'd destroyed his own family out of spite and wounded pride. "I won the right to sleep in my own bed," I said finally. "In an empty house, with no family to share it with. That's not my fault. Laura made her choices, and now she has to live with the consequences." "And what about Beth and Janie? What choices did they make?" The question hung in the air between us, like smoke from a house fire, acrid and choking. I didn't have an answer for it, because there wasn't a good answer. My daughters were innocent victims in this war, and they were going to pay the price for their parents' mistakes for years to come. "I did what I had to do," I said. "Did you? Or did you do what felt good in the moment? Consequences be damned." Before I could answer, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer it anyway. "Jason?" Laura's voice was small and frightened, nothing like the confident woman who'd announced her intention to steal my house 6 weeks ago. "Jason, I need help." "Where are you?" I can't tell you that, but I need you to know that I never meant for things to go this far. Scott told me the property transfer was legal, that you'd signed the papers voluntarily. I didn't know about the land lease, I swear. Laura, I know you don't believe me, and I don't blame you, but I'm scared, Jason. Scott's been lying to me about everything, his business, his finances, his past. The FBI came to his office today, and his lawyer says they're going to arrest him for fraud. What do you want from me?" There was a long pause, filled with the sound of traffic and wind. She was calling from somewhere outside, probably a payphone or a gas station parking lot. "I want to come home," she said finally. "I want to bring the girls home and try to fix what I broke. I know I don't deserve it. I know I have no right to ask, but you're asking anyway. I'm begging. Please, Jason, I'll do whatever it takes. I'll sign any papers, I'll go to counseling, I'll spend the rest of my life making this up to you and the girls. Just please don't let our family be destroyed because of the stupid, selfish things I did." I closed my eyes, trying to process what she was telling me. Laura was running scared, probably broke, definitely facing criminal charges when the FBI task force finished building their case. She was offering to come back to me not out of love or genuine remorse, but out of desperation and fear. "Where are Beth and Janie?" "They're with my mother. They don't know about any of this. The FBI investigation, Scott's arrest warrant, any of it. I told them I was going away on a business trip." "They need to know the truth, Laura. They're not babies anymore, and they deserve to understand what's happening to their family." "I know, I don't know how to tell them that their mother is a criminal." "Are you? A criminal, I mean?" Another long pause. "I don't know. Scott had me sign a lot of papers over the past few months, told me they were for business deals he was working on. I never read them carefully, never asked questions. I just trusted him. Like I trusted you. Yes, like you trusted me." Her voice broke slightly. "Jason, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I destroyed everything good in our lives because I was selfish and stupid and thought I deserved better than what I had. But our daughters don't deserve to pay the price for my mistakes." She was right about that much. Beth and Janie didn't deserve any of this. Not the divorce, not the legal battles, not the public humiliation, not the criminal charges that were coming for their mother. They deserved parents who put their needs first, who protected them from the ugly realities of adult failures and broken promises. "Come home," I said finally. "What?" "Come home, Laura. Bring the girls home. We'll figure out the rest as we go." I could hear her crying on the other end of the line, great gasping sobs that sounded like they were being torn out of her chest. "Thank you. Oh God, Jason, thank you. I'll make this right, I promise. I'll spend the rest of my life making this right." "Laura?" "Yes. Don't make promises you can't keep. We've both had enough of those to last a lifetime." After she hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, staring at the phone and wondering if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life. Manny had left without saying anything, probably sensing that I needed time alone to process what had just happened. Laura was coming home, not because she loved me, not because she'd realized the error of her ways, but because she was scared and desperate and had nowhere else to go. It wasn't the reconciliation I'd dreamed about during the long, lonely nights in my office, but it was something. Maybe it would be enough. The next morning brought news that Scott Williams had been arrested at his downtown condo, led away in handcuffs, while news cameras recorded every moment for the evening broadcast. The charges were extensive: mail fraud, wire fraud, bank fraud, money laundering, and a dozen other federal crimes that would probably put him away for the next 20 years. Laura wasn't arrested, but only because she'd disappeared and the FBI couldn't find her. There was a warrant out for her as a material witness, and eventually they'd track her down. But for now, she was free to come home and face the consequences of her choices with whatever dignity she had left. She arrived that afternoon, driving a rental car and looking like she'd aged 10 years in the past month. Beth and Janie were with her, both girls quiet and confused and clearly aware that something terrible had happened to their family. I met them in the driveway of the house that had started this whole mess, the house that Scott Williams had bought but could never legally occupy. The utilities were still disconnected, the yard was overgrown, and the whole place had the abandoned look of a property that nobody wanted. "Daddy!" Janie ran to me, throwing her arms around my waist with the fierce desperation of a child who'd been scared for too long. Mommy said we're coming home. That's right, sweetheart. I hugged her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo and feeling something inside my chest begin to heal. We're all coming home. Beth was more reserved, watching her mother with the careful attention of a 12-year-old who'd learned not to trust adult promises. Is it true what they're saying on TV? About Mom and Mr. Williams? Laura flinched at the question, but she didn't try to dodge it. Yes, it's true. I made some very bad choices, and now I have to face the consequences. But that doesn't change how much I love you and your sister, and it doesn't change the fact that we're a family. Are you going to jail? I don't know, baby. Maybe. But whatever happens, your father and I are going to make sure you're taken care of. I looked at Laura over our daughters' heads, seeing the fear and regret and desperate hope in her eyes. She'd destroyed our marriage, stolen our home, and humiliated us in front of the entire neighborhood. She'd made choices that would haunt our family for years to come. But she was still the mother of my children, and they needed her. We all needed each other if we were going to survive what came next. Come on, I said, putting my arm around Beth's shoulders. Let's go home. We walked up the front steps together, a broken family trying to find their way back to something that might eventually resemble normal. The house was dark and empty, but it was ours again, and maybe that would be enough to start rebuilding what we'd lost. Behind us, Scott Williams' BMW sat in the impound lot, probably still reeking of rotting shrimp. His real estate empire was collapsing, his freedom was gone, and his reputation was destroyed beyond repair. I'd gotten my revenge, all right. The question now was whether it had been worth the price we'd all paid for it. Only time would tell. 3 months later, I was standing in the kitchen of my house, our house, watching Laura make breakfast for our daughters like she'd done 1,000 times before. The morning light streamed through windows that had been dark for too long, and the familiar sounds of a family getting ready for the day filled the rooms that had sat empty and silent. It should have felt like victory. It should have felt like coming home. Instead, it felt like living in a museum dedicated to a life that no longer existed. The FBI wants to interview me again next week, Laura said quietly, keeping her voice low so the girls wouldn't hear. My lawyer thinks they're getting ready to file formal charges. I poured myself coffee from the pot she'd made, noting the way her hands shook slightly as she flipped pancakes on the griddle. The past 3 months had been hard on all of us, but especially on Laura. She was living under the constant threat of arrest, unable to work or travel or do anything that might be construed as fleeing from justice. What kind of charges? Conspiracy, mostly. Aiding and abetting Scott's fraud schemes. She turned to look at me, and I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. They found my signature on documents that were used to secure fraudulent loans. Even if I didn't know what I was signing, I'm still legally responsible. How much time are we talking about? 5 to 10 years if they decide to prosecute. My lawyer thinks he can negotiate a plea deal for probation and restitution, but... She shrugged, leaving the sentence unfinished. But nothing was certain anymore. Our lives had become a series of legal proceedings and court dates, of lawyers and investigators and reporters who still occasionally called looking for comments about the Scott Williams fraud case. "Daddy, is Mommy going to jail?" Janie asked from the kitchen table, where she was coloring in a book while waiting for breakfast. Laura and I exchanged glances. We'd been trying to shield the girls from the worst of it, but kids are smart and they pick up on things. Beth, especially, had been asking increasingly pointed questions about why reporters kept calling and why men in suits occasionally showed up at our door. "We don't know yet, sweetheart," I said, sitting down next to her. "Mommy made some mistakes, and now she has to work with some people to figure out how to fix them." Like when I broke Mrs. Peterson's window with my baseball. Something like that. It wasn't really like that at all. But how do you explain federal fraud charges to a 9-year-old? How do you tell your daughter that her mother might go to prison because she trusted the wrong man and signed papers she didn't understand? Beth looked up from her homework, fixing me with that direct stare that reminded me so much of myself. Is this why you and Mom got divorced? Because of the mistakes she made? Laura froze at the stove, waiting for my answer. We'd been living together for 3 months now, sharing a house and parenting duties and the careful politeness of two people trying to rebuild something that had been shattered beyond repair. But we weren't really back together, not in any meaningful sense. We were just two broken people trying to provide some stability for our children while the legal system decided our fate. It's complicated, honey, I said finally. Sometimes adults make choices that hurt the people they love, even when they don't mean to. Your mom and I are trying to figure out how to fix the things that got broken. Are you going to get married again? The question hung in the air like smoke, acrid and uncomfortable. Laura turned back to the stove, busying herself with the pancakes to avoid having to meet my eyes. We're just taking things one day at a time, I said. It was the same answer I'd been giving for months, and it was starting to sound hollow even to me. The truth was that I didn't know what Laura and I were to each other anymore. We weren't married, but we weren't divorced either. The proceedings had been put on hold while the federal investigation played out. We were something in between, suspended in legal and emotional limbo while we waited for other people to decide our future. The doorbell rang, interrupting the uncomfortable silence. Through the front window, I could see a black sedan parked in the driveway, the kind of nondescript government vehicle that had become a familiar sight in our neighborhood. FBI, Laura said quietly, recognizing the car. They're early. I opened the door to find 2 agents in dark suits, a man and a woman who looked like they'd stepped out of a recruiting poster for federal law enforcement. They were polite but professional, the kind of people who were used to delivering bad news with bureaucratic efficiency. Mrs. Fairburn, the female agent said, I'm Agent Martinez. This is Agent Chen. We have a warrant for your arrest. Laura appeared behind me, still wearing her apron and holding a spatula. She looked small and fragile standing there, nothing like the confident woman who'd announced her intention to steal my house 6 months ago. Can I finish making breakfast for my daughters? She asked. I'm sorry, ma'am. We need to take you into custody now. The next few minutes were a blur of activity that I'd replay in my mind for years afterward. Laura hugging Beth and Janie, telling them she loved them and that everything would be okay. The agents reading her rights while she stood in our kitchen, surrounded by the ordinary domestic scene of a family mourning. The neighbors watching from their windows as she was led to the car in handcuffs, just like Scott Williams had been 3 months earlier. Daddy, where are they taking Mommy? Janie asked, tears streaming down her face as we watched the sedan pull out of our driveway. To jail, Beth said flatly. They're taking her to jail because she helped Mr. Williams steal money from people. That's enough, I said, but Beth wasn't finished. This is all your fault, she said, turning on me with 12-year-old fury. You could have stopped this, but you wanted to punish Mom more than you wanted to protect us. The accusation hit me like a physical blow, partly because it was unfair and partly because it contained just enough truth to hurt. I could have warned Laura about the FBI investigation, could have encouraged her to cooperate earlier, could have done a dozen things differently that might have changed the outcome. But I hadn't. I'd been too angry, too focused on revenge, too determined to make her pay for what she'd done to our family. Your mother made her own choices, I said. I didn't force her to sign those papers, and I didn't force her to have an affair with Scott Williams. But you could have helped her fix it. Instead, you just wanted to watch her suffer. Beth ran upstairs, slamming her bedroom door with enough force to rattle the windows. Janie followed her, leaving me alone in the kitchen with the smell of burning pancakes and the weight of my daughter's accusation. She was right, of course. I could have helped Laura. Could have found a way to minimize the damage from her mistakes. Instead, I'd chosen revenge over reconciliation, punishment over protection. I'd gotten everything I'd wanted. My house back, Scott Williams in prison, Laura facing the consequences of her betrayal, and it had cost me my family anyway. The trial lasted 6 weeks, covered extensively by local media, and followed obsessively by neighbors who treated it like their own personal soap opera. Laura pleaded guilty to conspiracy charges in exchange for a reduced sentence, accepting responsibility for her role in Scott's fraud schemes while maintaining that she'd been an unwitting accomplice. The judge sentenced her to 2 years in federal prison with the possibility of early release for good behavior. It was lighter than it could have been, but it was still 2 years of our daughters growing up without their mother, 2 years of me trying to be both parents while managing a construction business and dealing with the ongoing legal complications. Scott Williams got 25 years, his real estate empire dismantled and his assets seized to pay restitution to his victims. He'd tried to blame everything on Laura during his own trial, painting her as a willing co-conspirator who'd helped him plan and execute his schemes. The jury hadn't bought it, but the testimony had been painful to sit through, listening to the man who'd destroyed my marriage try to destroy my wife's life even further. "You won," Manny said as we sat in my office the day after Laura's sentencing, sharing a bottle of whiskey and trying to make sense of everything that had happened. "Scott's in prison, Laura's paying for what she did, and you got your house back. That's what you wanted, right?" "Is it?" I stared out the window at the construction yard, thinking about the empty house I'd be going home to, about Beth's anger and Janie's tears and the way our family had been torn apart by choices that couldn't be undone. Because it doesn't feel like winning. What does it feel like? Like I burned down my own house to kill the termites. Manny nodded, understanding what I meant. We'd won the war, but the victory had cost us everything we'd been fighting to protect. My marriage was over, my children were traumatized, and my reputation in the neighborhood was permanently damaged. I was the man who'd chosen revenge over forgiveness, who'd prioritized his wounded pride over his family's well-being. "So what now?" Manny asked. "Now I try to pick up the pieces. Try to be the father Beth and Janie deserve. Try to rebuild some kind of normal life for them while their mother serves her sentence." I finished my whiskey, feeling the burn in my throat. "And I try to live with the choices I made." "Any regrets?" I thought about that question for a long time, weighing the satisfaction of seeing Scott Williams in prison against the cost of putting him there. I'd gotten my revenge, all right. I'd proven that nobody could steal from Jason Fairburn and get away with it. I'd shown the world that actions had consequences, and that even smooth-talking real estate developers weren't above the law. But I'd also destroyed my family in the process. I'd chosen punishment over mercy, justice over compassion, and now I was living with the results of those choices. "Yeah," I said finally, "I've got regrets." That night, I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where this whole nightmare had started, and tried to figure out what came next. Laura was in federal prison, serving 2 years for conspiracy and fraud. Scott Williams was in a different prison, serving 25 years for being the architect of the schemes that had destroyed so many lives. And I was alone in a house that felt more like a mausoleum than a home, surrounded by the ghosts of better times and the echoes of choices that couldn't be undone. Beth and Janie were upstairs, probably crying themselves to sleep like they had every night since their mother's arrest. Tomorrow I'd have to wake them up and get them ready for school, where they'd face the whispers and stares of classmates who'd seen their family's destruction played out on the evening news. I'd won my war against Scott Williams and Laura. I'd gotten my revenge, proven my point, shown the world that Jason Fairburn wasn't a man to be crossed. But victory, it turned out, tasted a lot like ashes. Outside, Mrs. Larrabee's house was dark except for the flickering glow of her television. The neighborhood was quiet, settled into the peaceful routine of families who hadn't torn themselves apart over pride and betrayal and the need to be right at any cost. I finished my beer and headed upstairs, past my daughter's rooms where the sounds of muffled crying reminded me of everything I'd lost in my quest to punish the people who'd wronged me, Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, new opportunities to choose between forgiveness and revenge. I could only hope I'd learned enough from my mistakes to make better choices going forward. But tonight, I was just a broken man in an empty house, living with the consequences of a war that nobody had really won.